Hello there. I recently made a video about what used canal boats cost to buy, and I also said in my New Year's Day video that I would do a follow-up about what they cost to own and run, and this is that video. If you are hoping for a video full of pretty pictures of the canals, this is not it. It's going to be another long, talky one of me sitting here with my laptop on which I have assembled a spreadsheet of typical costs, and I'm just going to run through them. So if you want pretty canal pictures, skip this one. If, however, you are looking to buy or get a share in or some interest in a canal boat, whether for leisure use or for living aboard, then hopefully the information I'm about to go through will be of some use. As I say, I have compiled a spreadsheet, and although notionally it's very simple, there are this item and this item and this item and this item, some of those items get remarkably complicated. To start with, for example, in order to put your boat on a waterway, you will need to pay the waterway authority some form of licence. Now, this is not the same as a driving test licence. There is no test of your competence to drive your boat. It's simply a licence fee to put your boat on the water. And there are inordinate number of variables in this concerning, first of all, which waterway you want to put it on. For example, the Canal and River Trust operate most of the canals and rivers in the UK. However, you've also got some rivers operated by the Environment Agency. You've got rivers like the Warwickshire Avon, which are completely standalone, run by the Avon Navigation Trust. You've got the Bridgewater Canal, very much in the news at the moment for that breach that happened. That's owned by a private company, Peel Ports Limited. And who else have we got? The Scottish Canals, if you want to go to Scotland, that's run by Scottish Canals. So depending where you want to put your boat, first of all, will depend on will affect who you need to apply to get your licence for. And they all have their own licensing schemes. And it gets very complicated because it'll depend on the length of your boat, the width of your boat, what you're doing with your boat, and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is give you some typical examples, and then you knowing where you want to put your boat, you'll have to go and find out the specifics for your size and width of boat and so on. I will try to leave as many links as possible in the video description to the various navigation authorities and all the other issues we're going to come across, so you can go and find them fairly easily. So let's start with the Canal and River Trust, because by and large, if you're buying a narrowboat, you're probably going on CRT waters, and they make a distinction between whether you have a permanent mooring or are going to be a continuous cruiser, that is to say a boat without a home mooring that has to move every couple of weeks. They also make a distinction between whether you've got a narrow beam boat up to standard narrowboat width, 6 feet 10 inches wide, or a wide beam boat up to, I think it's 3.2 or something like 3.24 metres wide, and then a wide beam boat over 3.24 metres wide. And again, the costs depend also on the length of the boat as well. So, taking, for example, a standard 57-foot narrowboat, because 57 is a go-anywhere kind of length, if you have a home mooring and you have a 57-foot standard narrowboat, the cost for the coming year for your licence will be £1,287, which works out to £107 per month. Now that is for, as I say, you if you've got a home mooring, which probably means you're not living aboard, but you might be living aboard. We'll come to that again in a moment. If you are a continuous cruiser, or in other words, a boat without a home mooring, they have a surcharge. So again, for the same 57-foot narrowboat, your annual fee would be £1,352, which is £113 a month. Now, if you've got a wide beam boat, again 57 foot long, and you've got a home mooring, £1,455. If you're a continuous cruiser, £1,519. And if you've got a really wide boat, but you've got a home mooring, £1,622 per annum. And if it's a really wide boat and you don't have a home mooring, £1,687. And that's just the Canal and River Trust. You've then got licences for the Environment Agency, and they operate, for example, the Thames, the Medway, the Ouse, the Stour, the Nen, and they have their own very complex set of charges that are river specific if you're just going to be on one of those rivers. look at the link in the video description for those charges. Honestly, there are just too many to go through. But then you can also get, if you want to be on the EA and the CRT waters, something called a gold license, which covers you for both. They haven't, at the time of filming this, published their rates for the gold license for this coming year. And the weird thing with a gold license is it only runs January to January. You can't start half the way through the year. You just have to pay the whole year's fee. But a gold license for that same 57-foot narrowboat would be £1,591. Again, that means you can go on things like the Thames. So a lot of narrowboats might want to do a bit of the Thames, in which case you might want to get that gold license, or you might just want to get an EA license for the Thames for the duration of going up the Thames. It really does vary immensely, as I started out by saying, depending on where you want to put your boat. Now, if you want to go on the River Avon, and I mean permanently on the Avon, they do a tourist license if you're just passing through, a 30-day license, or even I think when I did it, I bought a 1-week license for about 50 quid. But if you're looking at permanently putting your boat on the Avon, and they will expect you to have a mooring, a narrow boat of 57 feet, £769 if you pay the whole lot promptly in advance. It's double that if you don't pay promptly in advance. And then a wide beam boat on a leisure mooring, £962. Again, that's with the prompt payment discount. They do a hefty prompt payment discount, or you could look at the other way around and say they make an extreme surcharge for not paying up front in advance. The Bridgewater Canal, again, I say it's in the news, but I can't find any detail of what they actually charge. It's owned by Peel Ports Limited. They're a private company. They own the Manchester Ship Canal. And if you want to moor on the Bridgewater, you have to have a known mooring on the Bridgewater in order to get a permanent license for the Bridgewater. No idea what it costs, though. Their website just says, email us and we'll tell you. So sorry about that. You'll just have to email them if you're interested in that one. And then Scottish canals, as far as I can tell, seem to charge £257 for a licence to be on their canals, but they require you to have a mooring, and their mooring prices are something else. So that's licence fees. That literally just means you've got a boat, you can plop it in your chosen bit of water. But then the next thing you will have to have is some insurance. All the navigation authorities will insist that you insure your boat against fire, collision with other boats, collision with locks and things, any kind of damage you might cause on the boat. If you want to, of course, you can include full contents insurance and fully comprehensive for any damage you do to your own boat. The main thing they insist on the insurance for is in case you damage someone else. Luckily, insurance on boats is not too bad. A small boat, for example, is about £120 a year. I'm using examples from, well, I scoured the web and also my own experience of trying to insure my fiberglass cabin cruiser Twiggy, which is only 23 feet long. It's about £120 for the year. A typical narrowboat, again 57 foot, might be about 250 quid for the year. Like car insurance, this will vary enormously, so shop around. There are lots of people offering canal boat insurance. I remember doing it myself. I went to various different people and I got quotes that were like ridiculously expensive down to very, very reasonable. So it clearly just depends on you, who you phone up, what your inside leg measurement is, all that kind of nonsense that insurance people ask you for. So phone around. But typically I'd say you should be able to get insurance for a year, including contents and so on your narrowboat for about 250. Now it might be if you've got a big expensive new wide beam or something, you could spend £300, £400, £500. Insurance costs, as you probably know, are wildly variable. It's a bit like asking how long is a piece of string. But there you go, you need to have insurance. Now the other thing you might have, but you might not have, is a permanent home mooring to put your boat on. Certainly if you are typically a leisure user, someone who goes to the boat at weekends or goes on holidays on it, you're going to want to park the boat somewhere secure, probably, rather than just on the canal side. But not necessarily. It's always up to you. There's lots and lots of options. You can moor at marinas, which typically offer the highest level of security and facilities, but they will be more expensive. You can get canal and river trust moorings, which are actually on the canal itself. Some of them are on the towpath side, which obviously are less secure because anyone can wander down the towpath. Some of them are on the off side, which is more secure, and they might be gated, and only you and the other moorers have a key. You will also find that some people farmers have fields which back onto the canal, and if they have an arrangement with the CRT, which they must do in order to offer it, they might be able to offer you a mooring. Equally, some houses that back onto the canal, you can have a mooring at the bottom of your garden. But again, you have to have an arrangement with the CRT and pay them. You can't just have a boat at the bottom of your garden because it's on the edge of the canal. As soon as you stick a boat there, you are liable for a licence fee. So there's all kinds of different places you could moor. Scottish canals have their own set of moorings across all their different sites and different canals. So what I've done in terms of prices here is I looked at ABC Leisure. They just happen to be a set of marinas dotted around the country, and they publish a price list, which is quite handy. So the lowest price at one of their marinas for, again, a standard 57-foot narrowboat is £2,933 per year. Now, I forget which marina that was, but it was something like £5.10 per foot per, I forget the exact calculation, but anyway, per month. Yeah, that must have been per month, £5.10 per foot per month. Anyway, comes out to about £298 £244 per month. The highest rate at an ABC marina was £4,212 per year, which is £351 per month. Why have I made a slightly lower figure in that? Oh yeah, so a median sort of cost between the highest and lowest would be about £300 a month. That's just one set of marinas. There are many other marina groups, but that's a fairly good ballpark. Now, if you're in London, ouch. London moorings are incredibly expensive. It's just stratospheric. You could easily pay £15,000 a year for a London mooring, which is £12.50 a month, at least. I mean, that's London for you. London pricing is just absurd. Scottish canals, the lowest priced mooring I found there was £1,496 a year, which is £125 a month. The highest price, quite a jump, £4,981 a year, which is £415 a month. And then on a typical canal and river trust towpath mooring, again, these vary enormously depending on where it is and what the site is like and whether there are any facilities provided. You might spend £200 a month or something, £2,400 a year for a typical canal and river trust towpath mooring. End of garden, I don't know. It would depend on how you negotiate with the CRT and what their rates are. Farmer's field, again, depends whether your farmer wants to charge you lots of money or you have a friendly farmer who just wants 50 quid from you. It would be up to you to find a friendly farmer and make a deal with them. Now, on top of that, that's based on what are called leisure moorings. Moorings where you do not live aboard the boat, because once you start living aboard, marinas and moorings providers are kind of indebted to the local council to provide council tax. So they generally say, no, these are leisure use only for a certain number of nights per week. If you are going to be what they euphemistically call high use, that is, you are going to spend more than 3 or 4 nights a week on the boat, they will normally charge an uplift of, let's say, 20%. It could be more, to account for you supposedly using more facilities. Even though they charge the electric separately, and you probably won't be using that much more water, they still charge you this uplift for high use. And then if you actually want a proper, official residential mooring where you can receive post, you have an address as the mooring for anything, driver's license, all legal documents, and you will be paying council tax, those are firstly rare, pretty rare. There are some marinas that offer them, but they're not easy to find. And again, there will be another premium on top of that because the marina has to muck about with the admin of you being an official residential moorer. But how much they charge depends on the marina. You can see this is all very much piece of string stuff. At the end of this, I'm going to give you a total figure, and it'll be an average typical figure. You could pay more, you could pay less. So we've done licence, insurance and mooring. Every 4 years, you will have to have your boat tested for the boat safety scheme. This is looking at things like your gas, your propane system and your electric system and the way your batteries are stored and the way your diesel and any petrol tanks are set up to make sure that you are not going to be a danger to yourself. They check that you've got carbon monoxide alarms and fire extinguishers and all this. It's all safety oriented. You must have a BSS every 4 years. They're not hugely expensive. It's about £250 to get one done, so that works at £5 a month over the course of the 4 years. But it is something you need to bear in mind. And of course, if you need to then fix anything as a result of the BSS, well, it depends what they found as to whether the cost of whatever fixing that would be. I just mentioned council tax. By and large, you do not pay council tax on a canal boat because normally it's not your home. You'll have a bricks and mortar address where you pay council tax. The boat is, for the majority of boat owners, about 75% own canal boats for leisure use only. So it's not a home, you don't pay council tax on it. But if you have a residential mooring where you are officially living on your boat, you will pay, and it's typically band A, which is the cheapest band, and might come out to, let's say, £100 a month, but it depends on whichever council. Again, if you were in London, it's probably going to be phenomenal, but a typical band A might be £100, £150 a month if you're doing that. Now, I did earlier refer to high use moorings, which is a kind of euphemistical sort of way where people can live on their boats, but not officially. They're not really there between you and me, but they sort of are. The trick with that is the marina or other mooring provider will ask you for an actual bricks and mortar residential address that is your address for where your driving licence is registered, your passport, and any post goes to your home address. And then you can spend pretty much as much time on the boat as you like because you're not living on it. You've got a house and you just happen to spend an awful lot of time on your boat. So that's very much a grey area where people keep their heads down, if you get my drift. The other thing, of course, we come on to more typical running costs now. Diesel. Most canal boats are diesel, and even if they're electric, they tend to have a diesel generator aboard for the times when the solar can't come up with enough power. A typical narrowboat engine will draw between 1 to 1.5 litres of diesel per hour of running time. So how much you use depends on how much moving about you do or how often you run the engine, bearing in mind that on many boats the engine is run to heat up the domestic water and also to charge your batteries on board. So you might well be stationary but running the engine to do the charging and the hot water. Or you might have solar panels, in which case that charges the batteries, but to get the hot water you probably run the engine or a separate diesel heater. Again, so complex, so many variables. But diesel prices, obviously again, very variable. Currently, you'll pay about £1.50-ish. There's a broad spectrum. About £1.50 seems to be typical for diesel used for propulsion. And I specify that because the taxman does a different rate for any diesel you use for domestic purposes. So diesel that is used for a heating or hot water is charged at a much lower rate than diesel used for propulsion. And what usually the marinas do is you fill up the boat's tank, which supplies everything, so you can't really split it out, but then they charge you a 60-40 split, 60% propulsion, 40% domestic, and they will charge you the prices, so 60% of whatever you paid will be charged at the £1.50 rate, and 40% will be charged at whatever the domestic rate might be. Might be £1 or something like that. It is significantly cheaper. You can try arguing with the marina that you want a different split, and technically speaking, it's up to you to declare the split, because you're the one who gets in the trouble for it if you declare it wrong. But many marinas just say, no, that we just do a 60-40 flat rate, that take it or leave it, and you kind of have to live with whatever they say. So again, the cost of diesel could be anything. If you are a leisure user and you go to the boat every couple of weeks and you do a few hours a day cruising, but you're only using it at weekends, and maybe you don't use it so much during winter, you'll only use, I don't know, how many days might you say you might use? Let's say 28 days a year. You might only use the boat 28 days a year for 5 hours a day. And then if you're a continuous cruiser and you have to move the boat every 14 days, let's say you do the minimum amount of movement, so you're moving 26 times a year, that's every 2 weeks, and you might not move very much. You might just move a couple of hours, for example. So the number of hours of diesel and the amount of diesel you use will vary immensely. But just bear in mind it's about £1.50 for propulsion at the moment and £1.10 for domestic use. And you might use domestic for hot water, for running heaters, a diesel stove you might use for warmth instead of like a blown air or radiator heater. It very much depends on what you've got on your boat. Bear in mind also there'll be a considerable cost difference between the price charged at marinas. Even around different marinas the prices will vary immensely. It's like petrol stations on the road. But also you get the fuel boats which come along and can supply you. And I made a video all about a day in the life of a fuel boat, which I'll leave a link to in the description, and they can be very good value. So do look out, and it's nice to support a little business like the fuel boats as well. So if you've got one that does a route near you, definitely look out for the fuel boats. What else might you incur costs on? Again, for heating, coal briquettes or wood. Now, I know a lot of narrowboaters forage for wood, but you can't really burn it straight from the towpath. The wood will be soaking wet. You've really got to dry it out for a considerable period of time. Otherwise, most of it's just going up the chimney as wet, damp, gunky muck, which will clog up your chimney. So you might well buy bags of coal. Now, when I was on my narrowboat, obviously only using coal for heating during winter, and I went through about 8 25 kilo bags per month, if I recall. And that was, you'd start off with 1 or 2 as the weather started to get colder. And then in December, January, February, I was easily using 8 a month. 25 kilo bags, they used to be about £12 when I was on my boat. They are now considerably more expensive. You'll pay anywhere £20–25, I think now, for a 25 kilo bag of coal briquettes. So based on my example of 8 25 kilo bags per month for 6 months of the year, that would be £960 for a year, which averaged out every month is about £13 per 12 months, you see, averaged out over the year. Water, you pay nothing for, thankfully. Your boat licence fee, which we mentioned earlier, enables you to pop the boat in the water, certainly on Canal and River Trust and Avon Navigation Trust, and I think Environment Agency Waterways, don't know about the Bridgewater, includes access to many water points dotted along the canals, and you just moor up, put your hose in, fill the tank and go away again. So water is free, as is cassette toilet emptying points, LSAN points. They are provided, generally free use. If you have a big fixed storage tank, what's known as a pump out tank, not free. You will have to pay, typically at marinas, though there are some points provided by the Canal and River Trust, I think it's about £30–35. Someone with a pump out will correct me if I'm wrong on that, to flush out and empty your holding tank. Usually the holding tank is under the bed. It's very charming hearing all that sloshing around at night. But if you've just got a cassette toilet, like the ones they have in caravans, where you take a box that's about this big and you manually empty it, the LSAN points for those are included in your licence fee. Pump outs, how often you need to do them from a big tank, depends how big your tank is, depends how many people you've got aboard, depends how many times you go to the pub toilet to use that instead of filling your tank. But typically maybe £35–40 for a pump out, I would estimate. The other thing you'll find on most boats, not all, some are fully electric these days with a generator, but most boats still have some form of propane in tanks, typically 13 kilogram tanks, although smaller boats might have the little, what are they, 6 kilo tanks, I think, or even the little tiny 3.9 kilo tanks. But certainly on my old narrowboat, I had 2 13 kilogram tanks, and I went through one tank every 6 months, which some people told me was not much use at all. But given that I would normally have toast cooked on the grill in the morning, I would have the kettle on several times a day, except in winter when I put the kettle on the wood burner, but the rest of the year, kettle would be on the gas stove several times a day. And then I would also use it to heat up, I don't know, pie and chips or something in the oven for half an hour every evening. I didn't skimp on the gas, but even so, one 13-kilo tank would last me a good 6 months. So I went through 2 tanks in the year. They used to cost about 30 quid. They're now about 50 quid. This is for a refill. You hand the tank back to Cala, they give you a new one. All the marinas, well, I say all, it's very uncommon for a marina not to have gas bottle swaps, but you give them the empty one, they give you a full one. It costs about 50 quid now for a 13-kilo bottle. So that would be 100 quid a year, or to divide that per month would be £8 a month, wouldn't it? Yeah, about that. On top of that, you need a fund for maintenance. And if you think you don't, you do. You really need to put aside money for maintenance. There are various things. Firstly, random things will go wrong with the boat. Water pumps will break. Engines will break. All sorts of things will break. Your windows will suddenly start to leak. You will need a maintenance fund. How much you choose to put aside is up to you, but it wouldn't be a silly idea to have at least £1,000 a year for miscellaneous maintenance. Depends how old your boat is. Of course, if you've got a really old boat, lots of things will go wrong. New batteries, they cost a fortune, and you might need those every 2-3 years, depending on how you hammer them. If you've got lithiums and you take care of them, they could last a decade. Very, very, very dependent on what you've got, but let's say put aside £1,000 for general maintenance. Then you'll also need a fund for blacking the boat, that is painting the hull with the bitumen paint that stops your lovely steel narrowboat from rusting. Obviously, if you've got a fiberglass cruiser, this does not apply, but most narrowboats, not all, are made out of mild steel, and you need to paint that, and it is typically done with bitumen blacking every 2 to 3 years. And that will cost you about £1,000, and that includes being lifted out of the water at a marina or brought out on a flatbed truck of some sort, and then having the boat painted for you by the marina, 2 or 3 coats of typical Intertough blacking. About £1,000. You can, if you want, pay a lot more money, have the boat completely shot blasted back to bare metal, and then painted over with 2-pack epoxy. That is said to last 6 to 7 years, but it will also cost you 2 to 3 times the amount of standard blacking. So it's pros and cons. It's going to cost you 3 times, but it'll last you 3 times. So whether you want to do that or not is up to you. And then don't forget that the paint on the outside of your boat will over time fade, and typically a narrowboat starts to look a bit tatty and faded after about 10 years, and you're thinking, it's got enough chips on it now, I probably need a repaint. Repaints, if you get them professionally done, which is properly back to metal, all fully primered, several coats of undercoat, several coats of top coat, looking just sweet, it's about £10,000, and you're going to get that done every 10 years. Roughly speaking, if you want to keep it all looking totally smart. That's £1,000 a year you need to save just for painting. Now, obviously, not everybody does that. You're perfectly able to just sand back the paint that's already there yourself, get a tin of paint and slap it on with a brush. And a lot of people do that. So it can be a lot cheaper. But if you want to take it to a professional boat painter to keep it looking shiny, shiny, really posh, it's about 8 to 10 grand to have that done. And yeah, every 10 to 15 years. So again, it comes down to quite a lot of money per year to put aside. On top of that, you will also pay everyday stuff. Food, entertainment, broadband. If you want to have a telly and you want to pay the license fee, TV license. And to my overseas viewers, yes, there is such a thing. The normal incidentals of everyday life. I can't possibly tell you what those will cost. Only you know what you spend on food and things like that. You might have to up your food budget a bit if you live aboard, because sometimes you're cruising around an area where there are no supermarkets in easy reach and you can only go to a corner shop in a little village, and that can be more expensive. But basically, food is what food costs. I think that's the lot of all the fees, and I'll just quickly go down. I did a couple of columns of what a typical liveaboard and a typical leisure user might be. So a typical leisure user on a 57-foot narrowboat might pay £107 a month for their mooring, £21 a month on insurance, let's say £300 a month on the mooring itself, £5 a month on the BSS, nothing for council tax. This is leisure use, remember, you're not living aboard. Maybe £22 a month for diesel, just chugging around a couple of weekends a month. £13 perhaps during winter for some coal for the stove. Again, leisure use. I'm assuming you're not there all the time. Nothing on water. Perhaps £4 a month on propane gas, because again, you won't be using it all the time. And then a maintenance fund, maybe 28 quid a month for blacking, £83 a month for other maintenance, and £67 a month set aside for repainting. That all comes to a monthly figure of £648 to run a leisure use 57-foot narrowboat, excluding broadband, food, entertainment, whatever else you want to spend your money on. The annual cost of that, £7,778. Obviously, you can get that down. For example, if you want to do a repaint yourself, as I mentioned. But that is a good ballpark figure, I think, for if you own a 57-foot narrowboat for leisure use, it'll probably cost you £648 a month. Ish, and that is including money that you're stashing away for things like maintenance. Now, if you are a liverboard on the same 57-foot narrowboat, you'll be paying £113 a month on your licence from the CRT, about the same £21 a month insurance. Obviously, you won't be paying now for a mooring because you are moving every 14 days and just mooring for free along the side of the canal and then moving on. I should have mentioned, yes, just staying alongside the canal is free once you've paid your licence, but you do have to move every 14 days, whether you are a continuous cruiser or a leisure user. But if you are a continuous cruiser, you just don't bother ever having a home mooring, so no mooring fee for you. £5 a month for the BSS, no council tax, because although you're living aboard, you don't have a residential mooring, so it's not actually due. Let's say that you move once a week for 4 hours. That's quite generous for a lot of continuous cruisers. And you're using 1.25 litres an hour on your engine. Anyway, that all comes to about £33 a month on diesel. That's assuming you're not a continuous cruiser who is really trying to cruise the whole mile, every last mile of the network. If you're just someone who lives aboard and moves to move every now and then to keep in the spirit of the rules, it depends how much you move. You'll probably spend an additional £108 a month, however, on domestic diesel, because when you're not moving, you're still wanting to be run the engine, as I mentioned, for your hot water, charging the batteries, maybe you've got a diesel stove, things like that. So I've made an estimate that for the days when you're not moving, you'll run the engine for about 3 hours a day. And so again, that's about £108 a month. What does that total? £141 a month on diesel. Gosh, it's expensive stuff, diesel, isn't it? You might spend £80 a month on coal. How have I come up with that figure? Because it's the annual figure I came up with divided by the number of months. So about £80 a month averaged out over the year. Nothing on water, perhaps £8 a month on your propane if you use it the same amount as I did when I was living aboard. And then you've got all the little maintenance funds I mentioned, blacking every 3 years, other general maintenance and a repainting fund. It all comes to less than the leisure use fee, because you're not paying for a mooring, £545 a month, or £6,539 per year, again excluding food, broadband, entertainment, whatever other frivolities you want to buy yourself. The actual cost of just being on the boat and chugging around and paying all your dues, £545 a month. Those are example figures, as I keep stressing. What you actually pay will vary enormously depending on how you use the boat, what sort of boat it is, where the boat is, what kind of things you do on it, but those are typical examples. Hopefully some use. I've scoured various canal forums and looked for what other people say they're paying, and there are people saying, oh, I can get by with about £2,000 a year. I don't know how people are doing that really, but you could get it down to maybe £3,000 or £4,000 a year, but there are costs. And then you could spend more than that. Again, if you're in London, prepare for your costs to be sky high. So I think here, the average of about £7,800 for leisure use and £6,500 for liveaboard are not far off typical costs. So yeah, there we go. £545 a month for liveaboard, £650 for leisure use. Hope that's useful. Any queries, by all means drop them down below. I'll do my best to answer. And if you've made it this far, well done you. Thanks for watching. Cheerio.